Hello everybody, this is Jason Hires, and this is another edition of Jason's Playlist. So today I'm going to talk about a band that has our favorite brother and sister that aren't really a brother and sister. Yes, I'm talking about the White Stripes. And first of all, let's go through the White Stripes a little bit. The White Stripes is a two-piece band featuring Jack White on guitar and vocals, and basically everything that's not drums, and Meg White on drums and occasionally on vocals. And they created a pretty big splash for a while there. Unfortunately, they broke up. And the story was that Meg had some issues with anxiety. So I'm not sure exactly what the full story with that is, but the thing is they were really good while they lasted. Jack White has still had a really good career himself. So, while I definitely miss the White Stripes, we're still getting, good songs from Jack, and Jack was the primary songwriter for the White Stripes. Now, there's a little bit of a weirdness with the White Stripes. They presented themselves as brother and sister, but they were actually married, and then they got divorced. But I can kind of see why you would say that you were brother and sister when you both have the same last name and you're in the band. Because who the hell wants to sit there and have to explain that you were married and that you're still in a band all the time? And Jack likes mythology, and he likes kind of like folk tales, so it would make sense that he would perpetuate a brother and sister myth. Even though there's a little bit of when you kind of realize that they were actually married, it kind of gives you a minorly creepy, incestuous vibe that's not so great. But anyway, I digress. I'm going to talk about the playlist, and we're going to go through some songs that I created for a playlist. I'm going to tell you what the song is. I'm going to explain briefly why I included the song and kind of go through it. Once again, this is not a best of. This is not an all-inclusive best of. This is just a set of songs, even though this particular playlist does have a lot of the best songs for this artist. Alright, so to start it off, we're using the very first song on the very first White Stripes CD, just called The White Stripes, and that's called Jimmy the Exploder. And right away you can see why the White Stripes work, because there's just a lot of really good kinetic energy. And even though this is a very low fidelity recording, you can definitely feel the power of it, and you can see why there's magic between these two musicians. Okay. Track 2 is probably the most famous White Stripes song, which is Seven Nation Army, which is getting to the point where it's being played in, like sports arenas and everything, which kind of is maybe becoming a replacement for Rock and Roll Part 2, which please do, because if you know anything about Gary Glitter, you don't want him to be famous at all, because he's just a horrible human being, and we'll just leave it at that. Track 3, Dead Leaves in the Dirty Ground. This is a really powerful song. There's also kind of a continuation / companion version of this song that they do on Elephant called There's No Home for You Here, Girl, Go Away. And once again, it features, strong, simple imagery and really elemental music that really is powerful, and it connects with you on a strong level. You're pretty good looking for a girl, and at times with Meg's simple drumming and Jack's fairly direct approach to songwriting, this band can almost come off as sounding naive, and this song particularly does a good job of that, because even Jack's thing, he's not really sexual. He's just more kind of like, it's more of like an attraction, like the kind of attraction that you'd have when you're younger before you have, like lust, I guess, is the best way to put it. Next track is Sugar Never Tasted So Good. And this is an incredibly minimalistic song, simple, powerful. It has its roots in Mississippi Delta blues, and And then the other thing I really like about this song is where he uses a simple knock on the body of the acoustic guitar as a musical device, and I like that. Next song I'm going to talk about is Blue Orchid. Jack uses something called an octave pedal quite a bit. It's one of his unique characteristics of his sound on a lot of songs. Octave pedal basically plays the same note at multiple octaves at the same time, and it gives it kind of a interesting depth. Imagine if you're listening to like three people play the same piano notes but in three different octaves at the same time. That's kind of the idea of it. Fell in love with a girl. This could be a punk song. It's really simple. Especially it could have been a punk song from the late 70s in the UK, which I may eventually talk about this a little bit because there's a lot of great bands and great songs that came out of this era that a lot of Americans don't know anything about because they just never had any exposure to it. And I would love to educate people about that. There's all kinds of bands like The Damned and Sham 69 and the Buzzcocks, and there's a lot of bands from this era, the Stranglers. There's a lot of bands from this era that were actually good bands that nobody in the United States knows who they are. I mean, the most famous one to come out of this was the Sex Pistols, which kind of helped derail everything, and then also the Clash. Next song I'm going to talk about is, let's see, Truth Doesn't Make a Noise. And one thing about Jack is he's not afraid to use like things that don't sound perfect. At this particular track, he's using an old stand-up piano that's definitely not completely in tune. But it gives it kind of like almost an Old West feel, like a saloon kind of piano sound. Because those were never perfectly in tune. Let's see here. Little Ghost. This is such a really simple song, and it has its roots in like roots music. I could almost hear this song in like the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack. This song is just so simple and primitive. It could have been written a long time ago. Also, Jack talked about this, about how when you're in love, you see something about person that nobody else really sees. And he kind of takes that more literally with when you're in love, you see a literal ghost that nobody else sees. So that's kind of the idea of it, and I kind of like that idea of it. Icky Thump is another song that uses the octave pedal. I like the strange keyboard part where he's just kind of playing random notes that adds a lot of interesting character. He also does a lot of multi-guitar tracking, which is something he doesn't normally do in a lot of these tracks. And, kind of the general theme about immigration and stuff like that is kind of interesting, we are Americans, we are all immigrants, we are not natives. Most Mexicans are a lot more likely to be natives to this continent than we are. They're probably a lot closer tied to the native population than we are. So let's just get that squared away. Hardest Button to Button is a good demonstration of how individual notes sound versus chords. Jack, for the most part, is playing the same thing, but on the one part he's playing just the individual notes. He's doing a da-da-da-da, and then he's da-da-da-da, and then he's doing the chords da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. But he's just playing individual notes versus playing the chords. Without getting too confusing, the notes he's playing are the do notes. So from the do to the do, from the one octave again. So hopefully the octave thing doesn't get too confusing for you. An octave is a series of 8 notes. So in like a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, it's the distance from the do to the do. So that's as simple as I'll make it if you don't understand it. If you do, you're like, man, are you stupid? All right, next we're going to talk about Hello Operator. This song has something I've talked about before, which is a blues call and response pattern. He kind of does it with two things. He does lyrics and he does like a rhythm guitar track. So he's got like a da 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 So there's a chord, and then there's a little rhythm part, and he uses the lyrics in that same kind of pattern. So he sings a lyric with the chord, and then he responds with a little solo part. Yeah, Cannon is one of the really, really early White Stripes songs, and it uses a kind of a classic note pattern. And it has like this really incredibly primitive drumming. And then it also has a break part that references a Son House song and called John the Revelator. And John the Revelator by Son House is just literally, who's that riding? John the Revelator said, who's that riding? John the Revelator wrote the book of the seven seals. So that's the whole song, and he has a little break part where he throws in a little bit extra music. Jack is very deferential for Son House, and has a lot of Son House references in his work. I'm Slowly Turning Into You is from the last album, and it really shows that if you listen to Cannon and then you listen to this song, you can really see where there's a lot of growth in terms of the songwriting, how this song is a lot more complicated in terms of how it's constructed. And it's just, it's an interesting song. It also kind of shows some of the way that Jack White thinks about the world, which is kind of interesting. Jack is a very interesting personality. He can be a little bit strange at times, but that's kind of par for the course for a lot of musicians. I mean, so you just got to take it for what it is. All right. Next, we're going to talk about Hotel Yorba, and this is kind of like a front porch kind of song. Now, especially this time of year when it's warmer out, I really like to go outside with an acoustic guitar and just sit somewhere and play and sing songs. And this is a great song. This is a song that you can play on the front porch. The chords are easy. You can play it under there. It's a good song. It's just the perfect kind of a front porch song. Okay? And then lastly, since we started off with the very first song from the very first album, we're going to do the very last song from the very last album. And this is a song called Effect and Cause. And this is designed to be an album closer song, and it works really well as kind of closing out the White Stripes. Unfortunately, Jack and Meg went their separate ways. Jack is still active. Meg has kind of retired from music, to the best of my knowledge. I know that she's had some issues with anxiety and some other things. And I hope that Meg's happy and well. I mean, being in the public spotlight can be kind of tough. So I kind of get it. And the other thing I really like about this song is it does have some really interesting lyrics, and the lyrical concept of the song is very interesting. Also, while Meg is never really a sophisticated drummer, this actually represents one of the more sophisticated drum beats that Meg plays in the White Stripes, because she's using rim shots where she's hitting the side of the rim on the snare, not actually hitting the rim itself. So like this is the side of the snare, and she's hitting that instead of actually hitting the flat drum part. And also she's doing some kind of interesting cymbal work, and she's throwing in the occasional kick drum, which is a little trickier than what you'd think when you got the rim shots and the other thing, because the rim shots you have to be careful because you obviously don't want to hit the drum head. You want to hit the side of the drum. Anyway, that's probably going to wrap it up for today. I know this one's a little bit long, but that's the way it's going to be. Thank you for watching these. I might do one of these where I just pick a bunch of random songs and not have it be like linked with a band. And we'll see how that goes. Let me know what you would think of that kind of an idea. All right, thanks.